Sometimes the devil himself can have the heart of an angel. Maya Rodriguez stared at the crumpled deed in her trembling hands, rain drumming against the windshield of her 15-year-old Honda. $20. That's all she'd risked in that back-alley poker game, money that should have bought her son's inhaler. Instead, she'd won a mansion, a blood-stained Victorian fortress that had belonged to Vincent the Viper Castellano, Cleveland's most notorious drug lord. The house loomed before her now, its Gothic windows dark as empty eye sockets. Maya was a practical woman, a nurse who dealt in facts and medical certainties, but nothing about this moment made sense. How does a single mother working 3 jobs beat seasoned criminals at cards? Why had the dealer looked terrified when he handed her the deed? And most troubling of all, why did this house feel familiar, as if she'd walked its halls in dreams? As she stepped onto the mansion's rain-slicked porch, Maya noticed something that stopped her cold. Through the window, she glimpsed a wheelchair ramp leading to a basement door. The same type of ramp she'd been saving months to install for her wheelchair-bound son. What secrets had Vincent Castellano been hiding behind his reputation for violence? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's fingers fumbled with the brass key the dealer had pressed into her palm along with the deed. The metal was warm despite the November chill, as if someone else had been holding it moments before. She glanced back at her Honda, its hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat in the pre-dawn darkness. She should be home by now, sneaking through the apartment door before her babysitter Mrs. Chen woke up and started asking questions Maya couldn't answer. Instead, she was standing on a dead drug lord's doorstep, wearing scrubs that still smelled like disinfectant and the desperation that had driven her to that warehouse poker game. The key turned easily. Too easily. The door swung open with barely a whisper, revealing a foyer that belonged in a museum, not in the home of a man who'd allegedly killed 17 people. Crystal chandeliers caught the streetlight, casting rainbow fragments across marble floors that probably cost more than Maya's yearly salary. She stepped inside, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished stone. The wheelchair ramp she'd glimpsed through the window drew her forward like a magnet. Maya had spent the last 2 months researching accessibility modifications, calling contractors who quoted prices that made her laugh bitterly. The ramp before her was professional grade, the kind that cost thousands, installed with the precision of someone who understood that a few degrees of incline could mean the difference between independence and imprisonment. Why would Vincent Castellano need a wheelchair ramp? Maya descended carefully, her phone's flashlight carving a narrow path through the basement's darkness. The air grew thicker as she moved deeper, heavy with a scent she recognized from the pediatric ward. That particular cocktail of medical equipment and industrial cleaning products that clung to places where people fought for every breath. Her light found the first oxygen tank, standing sentinel against the wall like a metallic soldier, then another, and another, dozens of them, arranged in neat rows with the kind of organizational system Maya recognized from her own desperate attempts to manage her son's medications. Each tank bore a label with dates, flow rates, and initials that meant nothing to her but everything to someone. The medical equipment came into view next. Not the budget-friendly home health versions Maya knew intimately, but hospital-grade machines that cost more than most people's cars. Nebulizers that ran whisper-quiet, pulse oximeters with digital displays sharp enough to read across a room. A ventilator that looked like it belonged in the ICU where she'd spent 3 terrifying weeks when Diego was first diagnosed. Maya's chest tightened, not from asthma but from recognition. This wasn't a drug dealer's basement. This was a lifeline carefully constructed by someone who understood that breathing wasn't something everyone could take for granted. The drawings appeared in her peripheral vision, taped to the walls with the kind of care reserved for refrigerator art. Crayoned houses with smoke curling from chimneys. Stick-figure families holding hands under construction paper suns. Normal childhood artwork, except for the signatures at the bottom of each page, written in the careful block letters of children, old enough to spell words like pneumonia and oxygen saturation. Maya moved closer, her flashlight dancing across names and dates. Emma K., age 9, cystic fibrosis. Marcus J., age 7, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. Sophia L., age 11, pulmonary arterial hypertension. Her breath caught as she reached the far wall. There, in the center of a constellation of children's artwork, hung a drawing that made her knees go weak. A stick figure boy in a wheelchair, holding hands with a stick figure woman in what looked like scrubs. The woman had long dark hair, just like Maya's. The boy had Diego's crooked smile, captured in wavy crayon lines. At the bottom, in handwriting she didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar, Diego R., age 12, severe asthma. His mama works very hard to help him breathe. Maya's phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the concrete floor. The flashlight rolled, sending wild shadows dancing across the walls as it spun. In the strobing light she caught glimpses of more equipment, more drawings, more evidence that someone had been watching, helping, caring for children whose families couldn't afford to keep them alive, including her son. The phone's light finally stopped, pointing toward a corner where a small desk sat covered in manila folders. Maya crawled toward it, her hands shaking as she gathered the scattered papers. Medical records, insurance denials, hospital bills marked paid in full in red ink. At the top of the pile, a folder labeled D. Rodriguez in that same careful handwriting. Maya sat back on her heels, surrounded by the evidence of Vincent Castellano's secret. The man Cleveland feared, the criminal who'd built an empire on poison and violence, had spent his profits keeping dying children alive, including hers. But Vincent Castellano was dead, murdered 3 weeks ago in a drive-by shooting that had made headlines for days. Which meant someone else knew about this place. Someone else had been watching Diego, paying his bills, keeping him breathing. Someone who'd made sure Maya won that deed tonight. Maya stared at Diego's folder until the letters blurred together, her mind struggling to process what she'd found. The basement felt like a tomb now, filled with the ghosts of Vincent Castellano's impossible generosity. She needed to get home. She needed to think. She needed to pretend for just a few more hours that her world hadn't turned completely upside down. The drive back to East Cleveland passed in a haze of streetlights and unanswered questions. Maya's Honda wheezed through the empty streets, its engine making the same labored sounds Diego's lungs produced on bad days. She'd been meaning to get the car looked at for months, but between his medical appointments and her 3 jobs, there was never time or money for both breathing and transportation. Mrs. Chen was asleep on Maya's couch when she crept through the apartment door, the elderly woman's gentle snores competing with the hum of Diego's air purifier from the bedroom. Maya had found Mrs. Chen through a community board at the hospital, a retired seamstress whose granddaughter had died from the same condition Diego fought every day. She charged almost nothing to watch him during Maya's night shifts, understanding that some families existed in the razor-thin space between survival and catastrophe. Maya tucked a $20 bill under Mrs. Chen's purse, money she couldn't afford to give, but couldn't afford not to. The woman had never asked for more than the agreed-upon rate, but Maya had seen her eyeing the empty grocery shelves, had noticed how Mrs. Chen sometimes brought her own tea bags because Maya had run out. Diego's bedroom door was cracked open, just the way he liked it. Not closed, because that made him feel trapped when he couldn't breathe, but not wide open either, because 12-year-old boys still needed their privacy. Maya slipped inside, her practiced nurse's eye automatically cataloging the sounds and rhythms that defined their nights. The nebulizer sat ready on his nightstand, next to an inhaler with exactly 3 doses left. His peak flow meter lay beside a notebook, where they tracked his breathing capacity each morning and evening, a ritual born from too many midnight emergency room visits. The humidifier hummed in the corner, filling the air with the moisture that made each breath a little easier. Diego slept curled on his side, one hand resting on his chest the way Maya had taught him to monitor his own breathing. Even in sleep, his shoulders were slightly elevated, positioned to keep his airways open. The pulse oximeter on his finger glowed red in the darkness, a technological guardian angel that would sound an alarm if his oxygen levels dropped below safe ranges. Maya sank into the chair beside his bed, the same chair where she'd spent countless hours during his worst episodes. The cushions had molded to her body over the years, creating a depression that perfectly fit a mother's worry. From here, she could reach his medications, his emergency inhaler, and the phone to call 911 if needed. She watched her son's chest rise and fall with the mechanical precision that never quite looked natural. Diego had learned to breathe consciously at an age when other children were learning to ride bikes. While his classmates played soccer and ran races, he practiced breathing exercises and memorized the early warning signs of an attack. He'd grown up understanding that his body was both a gift and a potential betrayal, that each day above ground was borrowed time. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. Her supervisor, asking if she could pick up an extra shift this weekend. The pediatric ward was understaffed again, and Maya's combination of bilingual skills and patience with frightened parents made her invaluable. She typed back yes before she could think too hard about the exhaustion that had settled into her bones like a chronic condition. 3 jobs barely covered their expenses. Nursing shifts at Cleveland General provided their health insurance and steady income. Weekend work at an urgent care clinic filled the gaps between Diego's specialist appointments. Thursday evenings cleaning offices downtown gave her just enough extra to cover the medications their insurance refused to approve. Maya had become an expert at the mathematics of survival. She could calculate Diego's daily medication costs down to the penny, knew exactly how many shifts she needed to cover rent, utilities, and groceries. She'd memorized the phone numbers for every assistance program in the county and had learned to navigate the bureaucracy of medical billing with the persistence of someone who understood that a single denied claim could mean her son stopped breathing. The folder from Castellano's basement felt like a weight in her jacket pocket. Someone had been watching them, helping them, keeping Diego alive without her knowledge. The anonymous payments that had appeared when their insurance lapsed, the prescription assistance that had materialized just when they'd run out of options. Medical supply deliveries that had arrived, addressed to D. Rodriguez with no return address. Maya had always assumed these gifts came from the hospital's charity fund or some benevolent insurance glitch. She'd been too grateful and too exhausted to question miraculous timing. But now, surrounded by the familiar sounds of her son's carefully maintained breathing, she realized their guardian angel had been Cleveland's most feared criminal, and someone else had taken over where Vincent Castellano left off. Maya dozed fitfully in the chair beside Diego's bed, the folder still clutched in her jacket pocket like a talisman. She jolted awake at 6:47 a.m. to the sound of her son's morning coughing fit, the routine expulsion of mucus that had accumulated during the night. Diego sat up automatically, reaching for his peak flow meter with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been managing a chronic condition since he was 4 years old. 350, he announced, recording the number in their logbook. Better than yesterday's 320, but still far below where a healthy 12-year-old should be. Maya helped him with his morning nebulizer treatment, the familiar ritual of medication and breathing exercises that started every day. "You're home early," Diego observed between puffs of albuterol. His voice carried that slightly hoarse quality that came from years of inflammation, but his eyes were sharp and curious. Too curious for a kid who should be worried about homework and video games instead of monitoring his mother's erratic work schedule. "Caught a break," Maya lied, smoothing his unruly hair. "Mrs. Rodriguez called in sick, so they sent me home after the overnight census dropped." Diego nodded, accepting the explanation with the trust that made Maya's chest ache. He'd learned not to ask too many questions about money or work, understanding instinctively that some truths were too heavy for children to carry. But she caught him sometimes, watching her count pills or studying the stack of medical bills with an expression too old for his face. Maya was scrambling eggs when her phone rang. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. Unemployment meant she couldn't afford to miss potential shifts or callback opportunities. "Ms. Rodriguez?" The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I understand you've recently acquired the Castellano property." Maya's hand froze on the spatula. She glanced toward the living room where Diego was getting ready for school, his backpack loaded with emergency inhalers and peak flow meters, like other kids carried pencils and notebooks. I'm sorry, who is this? I worked with Vincent on his charitable projects. I think it's important that we meet. There are children who depend on the services that house provides, and with Vincent gone, they're in danger. The eggs began to burn, but Maya couldn't move. Someone else knew about the basement, about the children's drawings, about Diego's folder. I don't know what you're talking about. Ms. Rodriguez, your son Diego is 12 years old. Severe asthma, multiple hospitalizations. His last emergency room visit was October 15th, when his peak flow dropped to 220 and his oxygen saturation hit 87%. You were working a double shift at Cleveland General, and Mrs. Chen brought him in. Maya's blood turned to ice. No one should have those details. Hospital records were protected, confidential. Even she had to show ID and jump through privacy hoops to access Diego's information. How do you... Vincent kept detailed records on every child we helped. Diego's file is quite extensive. Someone has been covering his prescription costs and equipment needs for the past 18 months. Someone who ensured you won that deed last night so the work could continue. The phone slipped in Maya's sweaty palm. Through the kitchen doorway, she watched Diego gather his school supplies, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned not to exert himself unnecessarily. His inhaler went in his front pocket, always the front pocket where he could reach it quickly. His emergency action plan, laminated and color-coded, slipped into his backpack's main compartment. "Mom, I'm gonna miss the bus," Diego called, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. The weight made him pause for a moment, catching his breath with the subtle head tilt that meant he was monitoring his breathing. "The children need you to make a choice, Miss Rodriguez," Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice urgent but controlled. "Vincent's network is crumbling. Families are losing access to medications they can't afford. Equipment is being repossessed. Some of these children won't survive another month without intervention." Maya watched Diego head toward the door, his gait slightly slower than other kids his age, but steady. He'd learned to pace himself, to recognize his limits before they became dangerous. At the threshold, he turned back with a ritual they'd developed over years of emergency separations. "Love you, Mom. Call if you need anything, and I'll call if my breathing gets weird. Love you too, baby. Have a good day." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Maya alone with a stranger's voice carrying the weight of impossible decisions. Through the window, she watched Diego wait for the school bus, his shoulders moving with the conscious rhythm of controlled breathing. Her son, alive because a dead criminal had chosen to save him. "Meet me at the house at noon," Dr. Vasquez said. "There's so much more you need to understand about what Vincent built, about who's been watching your family, about what happens next." The line went dead, leaving Maya staring at her phone as the school bus carried Diego away. In her jacket pocket, his folder felt heavier than ever, filled with secrets that could either save them or destroy everything she'd worked to protect. She had 4 hours to decide whether to trust another stranger with her son's life. Maya stood at her kitchen window long after the school bus disappeared, her untouched coffee growing cold in her hands. The burned eggs sat congealed in the pan, filling the apartment with the acrid smell of her distraction. 4 hours. Dr. Vasquez had given her 4 hours to decide whether to walk back into Vincent Castellano's world, and Maya's mind reeled with everything that could go wrong. She pulled Diego's folder from her jacket pocket, spreading the contents across her small dining table. Medical records she'd never seen before documented every hospitalization, every medication change, every terrifying midnight when his oxygen levels had dropped into dangerous territory. Someone had been watching them with the thoroughness of a stalker, tracking her son's condition with clinical precision. The anonymous payments made sense now. The prescription assistance that had appeared exactly when their insurance reached its yearly limit. The nebulizer that had been delivered the day after Diego's old one broke, addressed to him with no return label. Maya had always wondered about the timing, but desperation had a way of making people accept miracles without questions. Now she understood the price of those miracles might be higher than she could afford to pay. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the urgent care clinic, asking if she could cover a shift this afternoon. She stared at the message, calculating the money she'd lose by saying no against the danger of saying yes to Dr. Vasquez. Every missed shift meant something else they couldn't afford. Groceries, utilities, the copays that kept piling up despite their insurance. She thought about the other children whose artwork decorated Castellano's basement walls. Kids with names she didn't recognize but conditions she understood intimately. Their parents were probably like her, working multiple jobs, navigating insurance denials, making impossible choices between rent and medication. How many of them were watching their children struggle to breathe while rich pharmaceutical companies counted profits? But Vincent Castellano had been a drug dealer, a criminal who'd built his fortune destroying lives, poisoning communities like the one where Maya had grown up. The newspaper articles she'd read about his murder painted him as a monster who'd turned East Cleveland into a war zone. How could someone like that have cared about sick children? Maya's hands shook as she Googled Dr. Elena Vasquez, searching for some verification that this wasn't an elaborate trap. She found a license verification for a pediatric pulmonologist affiliated with Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, but no photos, no recent publications, no social media presence. Either the woman was legitimate but extremely private, or someone had carefully constructed a convincing lie. The smart thing would be to call the police, turn over the deed, and walk away. Maya had spent 12 years protecting Diego from everything dangerous: environmental triggers, overexertion, respiratory infections that could kill him. She'd built their life around minimizing risk, creating safe spaces, avoiding anything that might threaten the delicate balance that kept him breathing. Walking back into that mansion meant entering a world where people got murdered for their secrets. It meant trusting strangers who knew too much about her family. It meant potentially becoming a target for whoever had killed Vincent Castellano. But it also meant answers. Maya had spent years feeling helpless, watching her son suffer while she counted pennies and begged insurance companies for coverage. She'd accepted charity without understanding its source, grateful but powerless. Now someone was offering her agency, the chance to help not just Diego but dozens of children fighting the same battles. Maya picked up her laptop and began researching the other names from the basement drawings. Emma K., with cystic fibrosis, had died 3 months ago, according to an obituary that mentioned her family's struggle to afford treatment. Marcus J. was currently hospitalized at Rainbow Babies, his parents posting desperate fundraising pleas on social media. Sophia L. had been airlifted to Cincinnati Children's Hospital 2 weeks ago when her local hospital couldn't provide the specialized care she needed. These weren't abstract statistics. They were real children dying while their families fought bureaucracy and bankruptcy. Vincent Castellano might have been a monster, but he'd saved lives that the legitimate medical system had abandoned. Maya's phone rang, making her jump. Diego's school calling to inform her that he'd had a minor breathing episode during gym class but was fine now, resting in the nurse's office. Standard protocol, nothing to worry about, but could she confirm his current medication list? "He's okay." Maya's voice cracked with the terror that lived permanently in her throat. "He's fine, Miss Rodriguez. He used his inhaler and his breathing returned to normal. He wanted me to tell you he followed his action plan perfectly." After hanging up, Maya stared at her reflection in the laptop screen. She looked exhausted, older than her 34 years, worn down by the constant vigilance required to keep her son alive. How many more years could she maintain this pace? How many more crises could they survive on prayer and borrowed time? At 11:45, Maya stood in her doorway, keys in hand, still undecided. The smart choice warred with the desperate choice, safety battling hope in her chest like competing medications. She had 15 minutes to choose between the devil she knew and the angel she couldn't trust. Maya locked her apartment door with trembling fingers and walked toward the bus stop, each step feeling like a betrayal of every careful decision she'd made as a mother. The November wind cut through her thin jacket, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust from Euclid Avenue. She clutched the mansion's deed in her pocket alongside Diego's folder, 2 pieces of paper that had somehow become the weight of her entire world. The bus ride to Shaker Heights felt like crossing an ocean. Maya watched East Cleveland blur past the grimy windows, boarded storefronts, chain-link fences, the corner where she'd grown up knowing which blocks to avoid after dark. With each mile, the neighborhood transformed. Cracked sidewalks gave way to manicured lawns. Barred windows disappeared behind wrought-iron gates that spoke of choice rather than necessity. She'd made this journey before, cleaning houses for families whose monthly grocery budgets exceeded her annual salary. But today felt different. Today she wasn't visiting someone else's world as hired help. Today she carried the deed to a mansion in her pocket, though she still couldn't quite believe it was real. The Castellano house loomed at the end of Coventry Lane like something from a Gothic novel, all dark stone and towering spires that seemed to pierce the grey sky. Maya stood at the ornate iron gates, her finger hovering over the call button. A security camera tracked her movement with mechanical precision, its red light blinking like a predator's eye. This was her last chance to turn around, to take the bus home, pick up Diego from school, and pretend none of this had happened. She could destroy the deed, ignore Dr. Vasquez's call, go back to working 3 jobs and praying their luck would hold. It would be safe, predictable, the kind of decision a responsible mother would make. But Diego's folder burned in her pocket like an accusation. Someone had been watching her son for 18 months, documenting his struggles, ensuring his survival. Someone had orchestrated last night's poker game, manipulated the cards or the players or the universe itself to put that deed in her hands. Maya had been a passenger in her own life, grateful for scraps from an anonymous benefactor while her son fought to breathe. She pressed the call button. "Miss Rodriguez, you came." Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled through the intercom, warm with relief Maya hadn't expected. The gates swung open with silent efficiency, revealing a circular driveway that curved around an elaborate fountain. Maya's footsteps echoed on Italian stone as she approached the massive front door, its carved panels depicting angels and demons locked in eternal combat. The symbolism felt too obvious, too perfectly aligned with her internal struggle. Dr. Vasquez answered the door before Maya could knock. She was younger than her voice suggested, perhaps 40, with silver threading through black hair pulled into a neat bun. Her scrubs bore the logo of Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, and her hands carried the soft calluses Maya recognized in medical professionals who'd spent decades touching patients with gentle precision. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Vasquez said, stepping aside to let Maya enter. "I know this must be terrifying." The mansion's interior defied Maya's expectations. Instead of the gaudy displays of wealth she'd imagined, the rooms felt more like a high-end medical facility. The marble floors gleamed under LED lighting designed to reduce eye strain. Handrails lined the hallways at wheelchair height. The air itself felt different, filtered, humidified, carefully controlled for fragile respiratory systems. Vincent wasn't what people thought, Dr. Vasquez said, leading Maya through a corridor lined with children's artwork. Yes, he sold drugs. Yes, he hurt people. But he also understood what it meant to watch someone you love struggle to breathe. They paused before a professional photograph showing a young boy, maybe 8 years old, his face bearing the telltale features of someone who'd spent his life fighting for air. The same careful posture Diego had learned, the same conscious breathing Maya recognized in her son's sleep. Vincent's nephew, Marcus. He died when he was 9 because their insurance wouldn't cover experimental treatment. Vincent had all the money in the world from his business ventures, but the hospital wouldn't accept cash from questionable sources. By the time he found legitimate ways to fund Marcus's care, it was too late. Maya stared at the photograph, seeing Diego's future in a dead child's face. So he built this place. He built a network. Doctors who would treat children without asking about payment sources. Pharmaceutical connections who could provide medications at cost. Equipment suppliers who understood that sometimes lives mattered more than profit margins. And when parents couldn't afford even that, Dr. Vasquez gestured toward a wall displaying dozens of anonymous money transfers. He found ways to help. They'd reached the basement door. Beyond it lay the medical equipment Maya had discovered, the oxygen tanks and nebulizers that had been keeping unknown children alive. Her children, she realized. The deed in her pocket made her responsible for every name on every drawing, every family facing impossible choices between bankruptcy and burial. "There's no going back," Dr. Vasquez said softly. "Once you walk through that door, you become part of this. Vincent's enemies will become your enemies. His secrets will become your burden. But those children," she gestured toward the artwork covering the walls, "they'll also become your purpose." Maya thought about Diego waiting for her call, about the school nurse who'd watched him struggle through another breathing episode, about Marcus and Sophia and Emma, about all the names she'd researched that morning, about the mathematics of survival she'd mastered, and the children who'd never gotten the chance to learn those calculations. She turned the handle and stepped into the unknown. The basement revealed itself like a secret world beneath the mansion's elegant facade. Maya descended the carpeted stairs with Dr. Vasquez, her hand trailing along a handrail that had been positioned at child height. Emergency lighting cast a soft glow over what looked like a pediatric intensive care unit that belonged in a major hospital, not buried beneath a dead criminal's house. "We have 18 children currently receiving treatment," Dr. Vasquez said, leading Maya past rows of medical equipment. Ventilators hummed quietly beside oxygen concentrators. 4 poles stood ready next to pediatric-sized hospital beds. A pharmacy cabinet stretched along one wall, its glass doors revealing shelves of medications Maya recognized from Diego's treatment regimen. Inhalers, nebulizer solutions, steroids that cost more per dose than most families earned in a day. "Where are they?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence felt sacred, like a church built for desperate prayers. "At home, at school, living their lives. This isn't a residential facility, it's a lifeline. When insurance denies coverage, when families can't afford copays, when children need equipment their local hospitals don't have." Dr. Vasquez gestured toward monitoring devices Maya had only seen in Diego's most serious hospitalizations. "They come here." A soft chime echoed through the space, followed by a voice Maya didn't recognize. "Dr. Vasquez, incoming patient." 7-year-old with acute exacerbation, ETA 15 minutes. Maya turned toward the sound, realizing they weren't alone. A woman in scrubs emerged from behind a partition, carrying a tablet and moving with the efficient urgency Maya knew from her own nursing shifts. She was followed by a man in a white coat, stethoscope draped around his neck, who nodded politely at Maya before checking something on a nearby monitor. "Maya Rodriguez, meet Dr. Sarah Chen and Dr. Michael Torres," Dr. Vasquez said. "They've been part of Vincent's network for 3 years." Dr. Chen looked up from her tablet, studying Maya with the assessment gaze medical professionals used on new colleagues. "You're Diego's mother. I've reviewed his files, excellent management of a complex case. You've kept him out of the ICU longer than most parents could have managed alone." The casual mention of her son's medical history from a complete stranger should have felt invasive, but Maya recognized something familiar in Dr. Chen's tone. The same exhausted compassion she heard in her own voice when talking to families in crisis. These weren't people exploiting vulnerable children. They were medical professionals who'd found a way to do their jobs without insurance company interference. "How many of you are there?" Maya asked. 43 healthcare providers across Ohio, Dr. Torres answered, pulling up files on a wall-mounted computer. "Pulmonologists, cardiologists, nurses, respiratory therapists, pharmacists. All of us have watched children die because their families couldn't navigate bureaucracy fast enough." The chimes sounded again, more urgently this time. Patient arrival in 5 minutes. Oxygen saturation dropping. Dr. Chen moved toward the elevator Maya hadn't noticed, hidden behind what looked like a decorative panel. "Emergency entrance connects to the garage. Parents drive straight in, no questions asked. We stabilize, treat, and send them home with whatever medications they need." Vincent funded all of this. Maya watched the medical team prepare with choreographed efficiency. Equipment wheeled into position, medications drawn into syringes, monitors activated with the soft beeps that had become the soundtrack of her nightmares. "Vincent provided startup costs and protected us from interference," Dr. Vasquez explained. But the network generates its own funding now. Doctors donate time. Pharmaceutical contacts provide medications at cost. Equipment companies write off donations for tax benefits. It's not charity. It's medicine practiced the way it should be. The elevator doors opened with a soft whisper, revealing a small Asian woman carrying a limp child who couldn't have been older than 6. Maya's nursing instincts kicked in immediately, cataloging the signs she'd learned to recognize in Diego: the bluish tint around the lips, the way the child's chest worked too hard for each breath, the terrifying stillness of someone conserving energy for survival. "Oxygen sat is 89, the mother said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "His rescue inhaler isn't working. The hospital said we needed pre-authorization for the nebulizer treatment, and insurance won't respond until Monday." Monday. Maya knew that calculation. How long could a child survive while bureaucrats processed paperwork? She'd made similar desperate math during Diego's worst episodes, watching the clock and weighing emergency room bills against oxygen levels. Dr. Chen already had the child on a gurney, oxygen mask over his small face, monitors beeping as they tracked his vitals. Within seconds, his color began improving, the frightening blue fading to pale pink. His mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief Maya understood in her bones. "This is what Vincent built," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "A place where children don't die waiting for approval from insurance companies that profit from denial." Maya watched the medical team work, recognizing the same desperate efficiency she'd witnessed during Diego's emergencies. But here, no one was checking insurance cards or demanding upfront payments. No one was explaining that certain treatments required prior authorization, or that the child would need to be stable before discussing payment plans. Here, dying children simply got the medicine that would keep them alive. "What do you need from me?" Maya asked, finally understanding why someone had orchestrated her winning that deed. Dr. Vasquez studied Maya's face, searching for something beyond desperation or fear. "First, we need to know if you're truly committed. Vincent's death wasn't random. Someone discovered what he was doing here, and they killed him for it. Taking ownership of this place means accepting that same risk." Maya watched the little boy's oxygen levels climb on the monitor, his breathing becoming less labored with each passing minute. His mother held his small hand, whispering prayers in what sounded like Mandarin. The scene could have been Diego 6 months ago, or 6 months from now. "Who killed him?" Maya asked. "We're not certain. Vincent had enemies in his drug business, but they wouldn't care about a medical facility. This felt personal, professional." Dr. Chen looked up from adjusting the boy's fore. Someone who understood exactly what they were destroying. Dr. Torres pulled Maya aside, his voice dropping to a whisper. 3 days before Vincent died, someone attempted to hack our patient database. They were looking for specific information, names, addresses, medical records. Vincent's security people traced the attempt back to a pharmaceutical company called Meridian Health Solutions. The name hit Maya like ice water. Meridian manufactured Diego's primary inhaler, the one that had mysteriously become affordable 18 months ago. She'd assumed it was insurance negotiating better rates, never questioning the sudden change in her copay from $400 to $15. "Meridian has been losing millions in revenue," Dr. Vasquez continued. "Our network helps families avoid their inflated prices. We provide medications at actual cost, not the markup that funds their executive bonuses. If they could expose us, shut us down, they'd force families back into their system," Maya finished. "Back to choosing between medication and rent." The boy's mother approached them, bowing slightly. "Thank you," she said in heavily accented English. "At hospital they say wait until Monday. Monday might be too late for Kevin." Dr. Chen handed her a small bag filled with inhalers and medication vials. "Enough for 3 months. If he has another episode before then, you call this number immediately." She pressed a card into the woman's palm. "Day or night, someone will answer." Maya watched them leave, understanding the weight of what she was being asked to inherit. Not just medical equipment and pharmaceutical connections, but the responsibility for dozens of families who had nowhere else to turn. If she walked away, if this operation collapsed, children would die. It was that simple and that terrifying. Vincent left specific instructions, Dr. Vasquez said, leading Maya to a secure office behind the medical area. If anything happened to him, ownership would transfer to someone who understood the stakes personally, someone with a child in the system. She opened a file cabinet and withdrew a thick folder with Maya's name on the tab. Inside were photographs Maya had never seen. Diego walking to school, playing in their apartment courtyard, sitting in hospital waiting rooms during his worst episodes. Someone had been documenting their lives with the precision of a federal investigation. "This is insane," Maya breathed, flipping through surveillance photos that spanned years. "How long has he been watching us?" "Since Diego was 2, and you first brought him to Rainbow Baby's emergency room." Vincent monitored every family in crisis, looking for parents who would do anything to save their children. Dr. Vasquez pointed to a medical timeline that tracked Diego's treatments with disturbing accuracy. He saw how you advocated for Diego, how you learned medical terminology to communicate with doctors, how you researched every treatment option, even when you couldn't afford them. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Diego's school, picked up by Mrs. Santos as arranged. "Homework completed. See you tomorrow." Her blood turned to ice. "Mrs. Santos died 3 years ago," Maya said, her voice barely audible. "Diego's emergency contact list doesn't include anyone by that name." Dr. Torres was already moving toward the computer terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard. Security cameras throughout the mansion activated, displaying feeds from every angle. Building is secure. No unauthorized access in the last 6 hours. But Maya was already running toward the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs. Someone had taken Diego. Someone who knew enough about their lives to use a name from their past, who understood exactly how to manipulate the school's pickup procedures. "Maya, wait!" Dr. Vasquez called, but the elevator doors were already closing. As the mansion's basement disappeared beneath her, Maya realized with crystalline clarity that she'd been naive to think she had a choice in any of this. The poker game, the deed, Vincent's death, all of it had been leading to this moment. Someone wanted her invested in this operation badly enough to threaten the only thing that mattered to her. They had Diego, and Maya would burn down everything. Vincent's network, Meridian Health Solutions, anyone who stood between her and her son, to get him back. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Maya stepped into a war she'd never chosen but now couldn't escape. Maya's hands shook as she dialed Diego's school, her fingers barely able to hit the right numbers. The mansion's marble foyer felt like it was closing in around her, each shadow potentially hiding another threat she hadn't anticipated. "West Side Elementary, this is Janet. This is Maya Rodriguez, Diego's mother. Someone just picked up my son and I need to know." "Oh, Mrs. Rodriguez." "Yes, such a sweet lady, Mrs. Santos. She had all the proper documentation and knew Diego's medical information perfectly, even brought his backup inhaler, which was so thoughtful since his breathing seemed a little labored today." The phone slipped from Maya's grip, clattering against the Italian stone. Diego had been struggling to breathe, and someone had taken him anyway. Someone who knew about his medical needs, who understood exactly which details would convince the school staff they were legitimate. Dr. Vasquez appeared at her elbow, having followed her up from the basement. "Maya, we need to think strategically about this." "Strategically?" Maya's voice cracked with hysteria. "Someone has my son. Someone who knows he's asthmatic, who knows our family history well enough to use a dead woman's name. There's nothing strategic about a mother whose child has been kidnapped." Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Maya's heart stopped for a moment before she grabbed the device with trembling fingers. "Hello? Mrs. Rodriguez." The voice was professionally neutral, neither male nor female, clearly being disguised through some kind of electronic filter. "Diego is safe, and he'll remain safe as long as you follow instructions exactly." "Let me talk to him," Maya demanded, her nursing training kicking in despite her terror. "I need to know he's okay, that he has his medications. Diego, say hello to your mother." "Mom?" Diego's voice was small, confused, but not panicked. "This lady says she's taking me to see a special doctor about my breathing. She has the same inhalers you use, and she knows about Dr. Martinez and everything." Maya closed her eyes, forcing herself to catalogue what she heard in her son's voice. No wheeze, no labored breathing patterns she'd trained herself to recognize. Whoever had taken him was managing his medical needs competently. That knowledge brought minimal comfort, but kept her from complete hysteria. "Diego, baby, I need you to stay calm and do everything this person tells you, okay? Mama's going to come get you very soon." The electronic voice returned. "He'll be returned unharmed once you complete a simple task. Dr. Vasquez can explain the details." The line went dead. Maya turned to Dr. Vasquez, who was already pulling up something on her tablet, her face grim with recognition. "They want you to access Vincent's private files," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "The ones even we don't have access to. Financial records, pharmaceutical contacts, the names of families who've been helped by the network." "What private files? I don't know anything about." "The deed doesn't just transfer property ownership. Vincent encoded biometric locks throughout the mansion that respond only to the deed holder. Fingerprints, retinal scans, even DNA verification for the most sensitive areas." Dr. Vasquez gestured toward a panel Maya hadn't noticed near the grand staircase. "There are files in his personal office that could expose everyone, patients, doctors, pharmaceutical contacts who've been providing medications below market cost." Maya approached the panel, watching it light up as it detected her presence. A soft blue glow emanated from what looked like a fingerprint scanner, and text appeared on a small screen. "Welcome, Ms. Rodriguez. Please confirm your identity to access Level 5 clearance." "If I give them what they want, they'll destroy all of this," Maya said, understanding the impossible choice she faced. "Every family that depends on this network will lose access to treatment. But if you don't, they might hurt Diego." Maya pressed her thumb to the scanner, watching the system recognize her as Vincent's chosen successor. The panel opened to reveal an elevator she hadn't known existed, presumably leading to areas of the mansion that had been completely hidden from her initial exploration. "There has to be another way," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew she was lying to herself. Whoever had orchestrated this understood exactly how to manipulate a desperate mother. They knew she would sacrifice dozens of unknown children to save her own son, and they were probably right. "Maya," Dr. Vasquez said softly, "Vincent left specific contingency protocols for exactly this situation. He knew someone would eventually try to use the network's families against us." "What kind of protocols?" "The kind that require you to trust him one more time, even though he's dead." Dr. Vasquez stepped into the hidden elevator. "The kind that might save Diego and preserve the network, but only if you're willing to risk everything on the planning of a man who spent his life staying 3 steps ahead of people who wanted him dead." Maya followed her into the elevator, knowing that whatever waited in Vincent's private files would change everything. The doors closed with a whisper, carrying her deeper into secrets that had already cost one life and now threatened the only thing she couldn't bear to lose. The elevator descended further than Maya had thought possible, carrying them past what felt like multiple basement levels. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into Vincent Castellano's true sanctuary, a command center that looked like it belonged in a corporate headquarters rather than a drug dealer's mansion. Multiple screens covered the walls, displaying real-time feeds from what appeared to be medical facilities across Ohio. Financial data scrolled continuously: medication costs, equipment purchases, pharmaceutical company stock prices. But what made Maya's breath catch were the patient files. Hundreds of them, each tagged with treatment schedules, medication needs, and family financial status. "He was tracking everything," she whispered, moving toward a workstation where Diego's photo appeared prominently on the central monitor. His medical history was displayed in devastating detail, including predictions about his condition that made her stomach clench. Projected hospitalization dates, estimated medication costs through age 18, probability of survival with and without consistent treatment access. Dr. Vasquez pulled up another screen showing similar projections for dozens of other children. Vincent didn't just run a medical network. He was building a comprehensive database to prove that pharmaceutical companies were systematically pricing families out of life-saving treatments. Maya's phone rang again, the same electronically disguised voice, but now she could hear Diego coughing in the background. Not his normal cough, the deeper, more labored sound that preceded his worst episodes. "You have 15 minutes to upload Vincent's complete database to the secure server we're sending you access codes for," the voice said. "Medical records, financial data, pharmaceutical contacts, everything. If you refuse, we stop providing your son with his medications." "He's getting worse," Maya said, her nursing instincts analyzing every sound Diego made. "His breathing is changing. He needs his controller medication, not just the rescue inhaler." 14 minutes, Mrs. Rodriguez. The line went dead again. Maya turned to find Dr. Vasquez staring at her with something approaching pity. "They're not just threatening Diego," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "Look at this." She pointed to an incoming message on Vincent's secure communication system. Emergency alerts from 3 different families in the network. Children are being picked up from schools, from daycare centers, from home, all by people with legitimate-seeming documentation. Maya watched in horror as reports flooded in. Kevin Chen, the little boy they'd treated earlier, had been collected by someone claiming to be a specialist from Rainbow Babies. A teenage girl with cystic fibrosis had been taken from her high school by a woman presenting transfer paperwork to a better-equipped facility. Each disappearance was professionally executed, using just enough medical knowledge to convince authorities. "They're taking all of them," Maya breathed. "Every child in Vincent's network." Dr. Vasquez pulled up a pharmaceutical industry newsletter on another screen. The headline made Maya's blood run cold. "Meridian Health Solutions announces major acquisition of pediatric treatment centers." "It's not just about shutting us down," Dr. Vasquez said. "They want our patient database to identify every family who's been avoiding their pricing system. Once they have that information, they can systematically eliminate every alternative treatment option these families have found." Maya's hands hovered over Vincent's keyboard, torn between her son's immediate need and the broader implications of what she was being asked to do. On the screens around her, she could see parents arriving at the mansion, desperate and terrified, looking for children who were no longer there. The medical sanctuary that had given her hope was being systematically dismantled. Her phone buzzed with a text message containing server access codes, followed immediately by another call. 11 minutes remaining, the voice said. But this time, Maya heard something else in the background that made her legs give out. Diego's breathing had deteriorated to the point where she could hear the distinctive wheeze that preceded his most dangerous episodes. He needed immediate medical intervention, not just medication. "Upload the files, Mrs. Rodriguez, or watch your son become a statistic." Maya's fingers moved to the keyboard, but Dr. Vasquez grabbed her wrist. "Vincent knew this would happen," she said urgently. "He built a fail-safe into the system. If you upload those files, yes, it destroys the network, but it also uploads something else, financial records proving that Meridian has been systematically bribing insurance companies to deny coverage for competing medications." "I don't care about corporate conspiracies," Maya snapped. "My son is dying." "So are all of them," Dr. Vasquez said, gesturing to the screens showing missing children. Vincent's evidence could destroy Meridian entirely, force them to release those children, prevent them from doing this to other families. But only if you trust his plan instead of giving them what they want. Maya looked at the upload prompt on her screen, listening to Diego's labored breathing through her phone's speaker. 8 minutes remaining. Her son needed her to choose him over children she'd never met, families she barely knew. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to save Diego first and worry about consequences later. But as she watched parents collapsing in grief on the security monitors, Maya realized that saving Diego by destroying Vincent's network might mean condemning him to a future where no alternatives existed at all. Her finger hovered over the enter key, her child's life balanced against dozens of others, with no way to save them all. Maya stared at the upload prompt, Diego's increasingly labored breathing crackling through her phone's speaker like a countdown to catastrophe. 7 minutes remaining. But as her finger moved toward the enter key, something on Vincent's secondary monitor caught her attention, a live feed she hadn't noticed before. The camera showed Diego sitting in what appeared to be a medical facility, but Maya's trained eye immediately recognized the equipment surrounding him. State-of-the-art nebulizers, 4 drips loaded with medications that cost more than her monthly salary, oxygen concentrators that she'd only seen in the most expensive private hospitals. "Dr. Vasquez," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look at this feed." Dr. Vasquez leaned over Maya's shoulder, and her sharp intake of breath confirmed what Maya was beginning to suspect. "That's not a kidnapping operation," she said. "That's a treatment facility." Maya watched Diego receive a breathing treatment from a woman in scrubs whose movements were too practiced, too gentle, to belong to someone planning to harm him. The woman checked his oxygen saturation levels, adjusted his medication dosage, and spoke to him with the kind of patience Maya recognized from her own interactions with frightened child patients. They're not torturing him, Maya realized, her mind racing. They're treating him better than he's ever been treated. Her phone rang again, but this time Maya answered with a question instead of desperate pleas. "Who are you really?" The electronic voice paused longer than before. Someone who understands that Vincent Castellano's network was never supposed to be permanent. It was supposed to be proof. Proof of what? That pediatric patients with rare conditions could receive comprehensive, coordinated care at a fraction of what pharmaceutical companies claim it costs. Vincent wasn't just saving individual children. He was building evidence that the entire system is artificially inflated. Maya looked around Vincent's command center with new eyes, suddenly understanding what she was really seeing. This wasn't the lair of a drug dealer who'd developed a conscience. This was the operational headquarters of someone conducting the largest medical cost analysis study she'd ever encountered. "The financial data," she said, pulling up Vincent's projections. He wasn't just tracking costs. He was proving that medications could be provided sustainably at prices 90% lower than market rate. Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly. Vincent used his pharmaceutical connections to trace exactly how much markup was pure profit versus actual production costs. The results were explosive. Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming video call. When she accepted it, Diego's face appeared on her screen, and for the first time in months, his breathing sounded completely clear. "Mom," he said excitedly. "Look at this place. They have machines that make the medicine taste like ice cream, and the doctor says my oxygen levels are the best they've been all year." Behind Diego, Maya could see other children from Vincent's network. Kevin Chen was building with blocks while receiving an 4 treatment. The teenage girl with cystic fibrosis was laughing with a respiratory therapist. All of them appeared healthier than Maya had ever seen them. The electronically disguised voice returned, but gentler now. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you were never meant to choose between your son and the other children. You were meant to realize that saving all of them requires destroying the system that's been holding them hostage." Maya's revelation crashed over her like a physical force. "You're not Meridian Health Solutions. We're what Vincent built when he realized that drug money could fund something more valuable than territory wars. A fully operational pediatric treatment center staffed with doctors who believe healthcare should be accessible, not profitable." Dr. Vasquez pulled up another screen showing architectural plans. The mansion wasn't his home. It was a pilot program. The basement medical facility was just the beginning. Vincent spent 3 years building a comprehensive treatment center that proves these children can receive world-class care for the actual cost of their medications. Maya looked at the upload prompt with complete understanding now. If I upload the files, I'm not destroying the network. I'm releasing proof that pharmaceutical companies have been price gouging families with dying children. Vincent's financial evidence will force insurance companies to cover alternative treatment options. Make it impossible for companies like Meridian to maintain artificial scarcity, the voice confirmed. But it only works if the data comes from someone with legal standing, someone who owns the operation and can testify to its effectiveness. Maya realized that every moment since the poker game had been leading to this revelation. Vincent hadn't chosen her randomly. He'd chosen a nurse who would understand the medical evidence, a mother who would recognize quality care when she saw it, someone with the professional credentials to make his research legally credible. "How many children are at the treatment center?" she asked. "Every family from the network, receiving the level of care they deserve while their parents learn to operate the new system." Maya's finger moved to the enter key with steady purpose now. She wasn't sacrificing anyone. She was choosing to trust Vincent's vision of healthcare that prioritized healing over profit. The upload bar began moving, transferring 3 years of evidence that would change how pediatric care was regulated. As the files transferred, Maya understood she wasn't just saving Diego or the other children. She was inheriting a revolution. The upload bar reached 100%, and Maya felt the weight of Vincent's legacy settle onto her shoulders, like a mantle she'd never asked for but somehow always been destined to wear. The screens around her went dark for a moment before lighting up with a single message: "Transfer complete. Welcome to your inheritance, Maya Rodriguez." Dr. Vasquez moved to another console, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "The evidence is now in the hands of investigative journalists at 3 major newspapers, the FDA's pediatric division, and 2 congressional subcommittees that have been investigating pharmaceutical pricing," she said. Vincent spent months establishing those contacts, waiting for the right moment to release everything. Maya's phone buzzed with another video call from Diego. This time, he was sitting next to a woman Maya didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing a doctor's coat with kind eyes that reminded her of her own pediatrician from childhood. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Harper," the woman said. "I've been working with Vincent's organization for 2 years. Your son is remarkable. His response to properly administered treatment has exceeded all our projections." "When can he come home?" Maya asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted him to leave a place where he could breathe freely. "That's actually what we need to discuss," Dr. Harper continued. Vincent's plan was never to keep the children indefinitely. It was to prove that a family-centered treatment model could work, then teach the parents to replicate it in their own communities. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a new set of files, and Maya's breath caught as she recognized her own neighborhood on a zoning map. "Vincent purchased the abandoned elementary school 3 blocks from your apartment," she explained. "The renovation plans are already approved. Medical facility on the 1st floor, family education center on the 2nd, apartment units for families who need to relocate for their children's treatment." Maya stared at the architectural drawings, seeing her future unfold in blueprints and medical equipment specifications. He was building this in East Cleveland. "Vincent knew that healthcare deserts exist in every major city," Dr. Vasquez said. "His plan was to establish treatment centers in the communities that needed them most, staffed by local medical professionals and funded through his pharmaceutical cost savings model." Maya's phone rang, but this time the voice on the other end wasn't electronically disguised. It belonged to Dr. Harper, whose warm tone carried through both the phone and the video screen simultaneously. "Maya, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand something crucial. In the next 24 hours, every major news outlet in the country is going to be calling you for interviews. Vincent's evidence is about to trigger the largest pharmaceutical industry investigation in decades." "I'm just a nurse," Maya protested. "I work night shifts and barely keep up with my rent. I can't be the face of some medical revolution." Dr. Vasquez turned from her console with a smile that held equal parts exhaustion and hope. "Vincent didn't choose you because you were qualified to lead a revolution. He chose you because you were already living one. Every time you worked 3 jobs to afford Diego's medications. Every time you advocated for a patient whose insurance wouldn't cover their treatment. Every time you chose your son's health over your own financial stability, you were already fighting this battle." Maya looked around the command center, finally understanding the true scope of what Vincent had built. The screens now displayed not just medical data, but legal documents, media contact lists, congressional hearing schedules, and FDA meeting agendas. This wasn't just about saving sick children. It was about dismantling an entire system of artificial scarcity that had made her son's breath a luxury she couldn't afford. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Amanda Chen, Kevin's mother. Dr. Harper says you're the one who made this possible. Thank you for giving me my son back." More messages flooded in. Parents she'd never met expressing gratitude for a choice she'd made in desperation. Maya realized that her moment of terror in Vincent's basement had connected her to a network of families who understood exactly what she'd been willing to sacrifice for her child's survival. Dr. Vasquez handed her a thick folder labeled Implementation Phase 1. Vincent left detailed instructions for everything: how to work with the media, which congressional representatives to contact first, how to establish similar centers in other cities. He even left trust funds to cover operating costs for the first 5 years. Maya opened a folder, seeing her name listed as the primary trustee for an organization called the Castellano Foundation for Accessible Pediatric Care. Vincent had legally transferred not just his mansion, but his entire vision for systemic healthcare reform. "I don't know how to do any of this," Maya said. But even as she spoke, she felt something shifting inside her, the same determination that had driven her to risk her last $20 in a poker game, now focused on ensuring no other parent would face that impossible choice. Dr. Harper's voice came through the phone with gentle certainty. "You'll learn, and you won't be doing it alone." Maya closed the folder and looked around Vincent's command center one final time, feeling the weight of $20 that had somehow leveraged her into becoming the trustee of a medical revolution. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd gambled her last money hoping to buy Diego an inhaler, and instead inherited the power to ensure no child would ever need that gamble again. "Dr. Harper," she said into the phone, her voice steadier than it had been in months. "When do we start?" "We already have," came the reply. "The first congressional hearing is scheduled for next week. Vincent arranged for you to testify about the cost differential between street-level medication access and pharmaceutical retail pricing." Maya felt her stomach lurch. Testify? In front of Congress? Dr. Vasquez pulled up another screen showing a calendar packed with appointments. Vincent spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Medical conferences, FDA meetings, pharmaceutical industry panels. He's already registered you as a speaker for everything. Your nursing credentials and first-hand experience make you the perfect advocate. Through the video call, Maya could see Diego playing with other children in what looked like the most advanced pediatric facility she'd ever encountered. His laugh carried through the speaker, clear and unobstructed by the wheeze that had haunted her dreams for years. For the first time since his diagnosis, her son sounded like a healthy child. "The East Cleveland facility breaks ground in 6 weeks," Dr. Harper continued. "We'll need you to help design the family education programs, train the nursing staff, establish protocols for working with families who've been failed by traditional healthcare systems." Maya's phone buzzed with another message, this one from her supervisor at the hospital. Maya just saw the news about pharmaceutical pricing investigation. "Call me when you get this. Administration wants to discuss your testimony schedule." "It's already starting," she murmured, scrolling through a dozen similar messages from colleagues, friends, and numbers she didn't recognize. Word was spreading faster than she'd anticipated. Dr. Vasquez handed her another folder, this one labeled Security Protocols. Vincent knew that challenging pharmaceutical profits would make you enemies. He arranged protective detail for you and Diego, legal representation for any retaliation attempts, and financial security for your family, regardless of how the industry responds. Maya opened the folder to find bank account information showing more money than she'd ever imagined having access to. But what struck her more than the numbers was a handwritten note in Vincent's careful script. "Maya, you risked everything for your son's breath. Now help other parents breathe freely too. VC." "He really planned all of this around me," she said, the reality finally sinking in completely. The poker game, the mansion, even my financial situation, none of it was coincidence. Vincent had been tracking families in medical debt for months, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. He needed someone who understood both the medical system and the desperation of parents facing impossible choices. Your nursing background, your advocacy for Diego, your willingness to risk everything. You were exactly who he was looking for. Maya thought about her last normal day, just weeks ago, when her biggest concern was covering Diego's inhaler refill. Now she was looking at congressional testimony schedules and architectural plans for medical facilities that would serve thousands of children. "What about the other families?" she asked. "The ones who have been part of Vincent's network all along?" Dr. Harper's voice carried new excitement. "They're becoming the foundation of our expansion model. Parents teaching other parents, sharing resources, advocating together for systemic change. Amanda Chen is already organizing family support groups. Kevin's father is working with our legal team to challenge insurance denial patterns." Maya watched Diego on the video screen, seeing him interact with children who shared his condition but no longer shared his limitations. She realized this was what Vincent had been building toward, not just treating symptoms but creating a community where children like Diego could thrive. "Dr. Vasquez," she said, turning toward the woman who'd become her guide through Vincent's legacy. "When I walk out of this room, everything changes, doesn't it?" "Everything already changed the moment you uploaded those files," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Now we find out if you're ready to see it through." Maya stood up from Vincent's chair, feeling the transformation complete itself. She was no longer the desperate single mother who'd risked her last $20 in a basement poker game. She wasn't even just a night shift nurse drowning in medical debt. She was the inheritor of a vision that could reshape how America treated its most vulnerable children. Her phone rang again, and this time Maya answered with confidence. "This is Maya Rodriguez, trustee of the Castellano Foundation. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end belonged to a journalist from the Washington Post. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we'd like to schedule an interview about your upcoming congressional testimony. The pharmaceutical industry has already issued statements challenging your credibility." Maya looked at the screens around her, showing children receiving care that should have been their birthright, not Vincent's revolutionary gift. "Schedule it," she said. "It's time everyone knew what we've discovered." The final confrontation was no longer looming. It had begun. The Washington Post journalist's voice carried the sharp efficiency of someone accustomed to breaking stories that toppled industries. "Mrs. Rodriguez, Meridian Health Solutions released a statement an hour ago claiming you're part of a criminal conspiracy to distribute unlicensed medications. They're questioning your nursing credentials and suggesting you've been compromised by association with Vincent Castellano's drug operation." Maya felt the familiar surge of protective fury that had driven every impossible decision she'd made as Diego's mother. "Let me ask you something," she said, her voice carrying 3 years of medical training and 6 years of watching her son struggle to breathe. "Have you ever watched a child turn blue because their medication costs more than their parents' monthly rent, Mrs. Rodriguez?" "Because that's what we're really talking about here," Maya continued, Dr. Vasquez nodding approvingly from across the command center. "Not criminal conspiracies or unlicensed medications. We're talking about children who die from treatable conditions because their families can't afford treatment that costs pennies to produce." She could hear the journalist typing rapidly. This wasn't how interviews typically began, but Maya had spent too many nights calculating medication costs against grocery budgets to be intimidated by pharmaceutical industry public relations. "What evidence do you have to support those claims about production costs?" Maya looked at the screens around her, displaying Vincent's 3 years of meticulous financial analysis. "I have documentation proving that a medication Meridian charges $300 for can be produced and safely administered for under $15. I have treatment records showing children receiving world-class care for 90% less than traditional hospital costs. And I have medical outcomes that prove this model doesn't just work. It works better than the system that's been bankrupting families." Dr. Vasquez handed her another folder, this one containing peer-reviewed studies that Vincent had commissioned from independent medical researchers. Maya had spent the past hour reviewing data that would reshape pediatric care regulations if it reached the right congressional committees. Mrs. Rodriguez, are you prepared for the scrutiny this testimony will bring? Pharmaceutical lobbying groups have already hired private investigators to examine your background. Maya thought about Diego's laughter echoing through Vincent's treatment facility, uninterrupted by the wheeze that had been the soundtrack of their lives for years. She thought about Amanda Chen's text message, about Kevin's father working with legal teams, about dozens of parents who no longer had to choose between their children's health and their family's survival. Let them investigate, she said. They'll find a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep her son alive, who risked her last $20 because watching your child suffocate changes your relationship with fear. They'll find a nurse who's seen too many families destroyed by medical debt, who understands exactly how artificial scarcity works in healthcare systems. Her phone buzzed with another incoming call, this one from her supervisor at Cleveland General. Maya let it go to voicemail, knowing she was about to have conversations that would end her night shift nursing career and begin something she couldn't yet fully comprehend. Dr. Harper, she said, addressing the video screen where Diego was now receiving a nebulizer treatment that looked nothing like the desperate midnight ER visits that had defined their past. How many families are we talking about? How many children could this model serve? Dr. Harper's response carried the weight of Vincent's entire vision. Conservative estimates suggest we could replicate this treatment center model in 50 cities within 2 years, serving approximately 8,000 children currently excluded from adequate care by insurance limitations or pharmaceutical pricing. Maya felt the number settle into her consciousness like a mathematical equation that finally balanced. 8,000 children who could breathe freely, 8,000 families who wouldn't have to gamble their last money on underground poker games or choose between medication and rent. The Washington Post journalist's voice interrupted her calculation. Mrs. Rodriguez, when you testify next week, you'll be facing some of the most powerful lobbying groups in Washington. Are you ready for that level of opposition? Maya looked around Vincent's command center, seeing not just screens and medical data, but the architectural plans for Diego's future, a world where his condition would be treated as a medical challenge rather than a financial impossibility. She thought about Vincent's handwritten note, about risking everything for her son's breath, about helping other parents breathe freely too. I've been facing impossible opposition since the day Diego was diagnosed, she said, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had already sacrificed everything and discovered she was stronger than she'd known. Pharmaceutical companies and insurance lobbying groups aren't more terrifying than watching your child turn blue because you can't afford their medication. Dr. Vasquez pulled up the congressional hearing schedule on the main screen. Maya saw her name listed as the primary witness, followed by Vincent's financial evidence, medical outcomes data, and family testimonials that would force legislators to confront the reality of pediatric medical debt. Schedule the interview, Maya told the journalist, and make sure they understand that this isn't about challenging the pharmaceutical industry. This is about proving that accessible healthcare works better than profitable healthcare. The ultimate test had begun, and Maya Rodriguez was ready. The Washington Post interview was scheduled for Thursday morning, but Maya's real confrontation began 48 hours earlier, when 3 black sedans pulled into the mansion's circular driveway at dawn. Maya watched from Vincent's command center as men in expensive suits emerged from the vehicles, their movements carrying the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to intimidating problems into submission. Dr. Vasquez's fingers flew across her keyboard, activating security protocols Vincent had built into every system. Meridian Health Solutions Corporate Security, Dr. Vasquez announced, reading from facial recognition data streaming across the screens. The man in the gray suit is Jonathan Blackwood, their chief litigation officer. He's handled pharmaceutical industry crisis management for 20 years. Maya's phone rang immediately, the caller ID showing a number she didn't recognize. She answered on speaker, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Jonathan Blackwood from Meridian Health Solutions. I'm standing outside your property with legal documentation that requires immediate discussion. May we come in? Through the security cameras, Maya could see Blackwood's confident smile. the expression of someone who had built his career on making inconvenient people disappear quietly. Behind him, his associates were photographing the mansion's exterior, documenting evidence for whatever legal strategy they'd already prepared. "Mr. Blackwood," Maya replied, "I'm curious what brings corporate pharmaceutical executives to my home at 6 in the morning. Mrs. Rodriguez, we have evidence that you're in possession of proprietary Meridian research data, obtained through illegal channels and being used to damage our company's reputation. We're prepared to offer a substantial financial settlement in exchange for your cooperation in resolving this matter privately." Maya felt something crystallize inside her, the same protective fury that had driven her to work 3 jobs, to risk everything in Vincent's poker game, to inherit a revolution she'd never asked for, but was no longer willing to abandon. These men had spent decades profiting from her desperation, from Diego's struggle to breathe, from thousands of families forced to choose between medical care and financial survival. "Dr. Vasquez," Maya said, her voice carrying new authority, "please upload Vincent's complete financial analysis to the Congressional Hearing Database. All of it." Blackwood's voice sharpened immediately. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I strongly advise against any precipitous actions. Meridian has significant legal resources, and we're prepared to challenge both your credibility and your right to possess materials obtained from Vincent Castellano's criminal enterprise." Maya stood up from Vincent's chair and walked to the window, looking down at the men who represented everything she'd been fighting against since Diego's diagnosis. For years, she'd been afraid of these people, their lawyers, their insurance denials, their impossible pricing structures that had nearly killed her son. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, watching him through the security feed as he gestured impatiently to his associates. "Let me tell you what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of watching my son turn blue because his medication costs more than my monthly salary. I'm afraid of other mothers working 3 jobs while their children suffer from treatable conditions. I'm afraid of a healthcare system that measures success in quarterly profits instead of children's lives." She paused, feeling Diego's laughter echoing from Dr. Harper's facility through the video connection that had become their lifeline. "What I'm not afraid of is pharmaceutical executives who think they can intimidate a mother whose child was dying." Blackwood's tone shifted, revealing the calculated aggression beneath his corporate politeness. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you're about to testify before Congress with stolen proprietary information. We have documentation proving Vincent Castellano acquired our research through industrial espionage. Any testimony based on that data constitutes fraud." Dr. Vasquez handed Maya another folder, this one containing Vincent's correspondence with FDA officials, independent medical researchers, and congressional oversight committees. Everything had been obtained through legal channels, documented through proper procedures, verified by multiple sources. "Mr. Blackwood," Maya said, opening the folder to review Vincent's meticulous legal preparations, "Vincent Castellano spent 3 years ensuring that every piece of evidence in my possession was acquired legally and verified independently. Your company's own publicly filed research supports every claim I'm planning to make." Through the window, she watched Blackwood's confident posture begin to shift as he realized this wouldn't be resolved through intimidation or financial settlements. His associates were already returning to their vehicles, recognizing a failed mission when they encountered one. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this conversation isn't over. Meridian has significant influence in Washington, and we will use every available resource to protect our business interests." Maya felt the weight of Vincent's entire legacy settling onto her shoulders, not as a burden, but as armor forged from 3 years of watching her son struggle and 6 months of discovering she was stronger than her desperation had ever allowed her to believe. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, watching the black sedans retreat down the driveway, "neither is mine." The real battle had finally begun, and Maya Rodriguez was no longer afraid. The black sedans disappeared down the winding driveway, but Maya knew Blackwood's threat wasn't empty posturing. She turned from the window to find Dr. Vasquez pulling up financial projections that made her stomach clench with recognition. "Maya, we need to talk about what comes next," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice carrying the weight of conversations Maya hadn't yet prepared herself to have. "Meridian's legal team will challenge every aspect of your testimony, but their real strategy will be much more personal." Maya settled back into Vincent's chair, watching Diego on the video feed as he worked with respiratory therapists who treated his condition as a medical challenge rather than a financial catastrophe. The sight of his unrestricted breathing had become her anchor, but she sensed that anchor was about to be tested. "They'll target your nursing license first," Dr. Vasquez continued, displaying legal documents that Meridian's investigators had already begun filing. Professional misconduct allegations, questions about your association with Vincent's operation, suggestions that you violated patient confidentiality protocols by accessing treatment records. The words hit Maya like a diagnosis she'd been dreading but couldn't avoid. Her nursing license wasn't just her credential, it was her identity, her independence, her ability to support Diego through his own expertise rather than depending on others' charity. She'd built her entire adult life around the medical knowledge that made her feel useful in a world that often seemed designed to make her feel powerless. "Without your license, you can't work in any medical facility," Dr. Vasquez said gently. "No hospital will hire you. No clinic will accept your credentials. Your career as a nurse effectively ends the moment you testify." Maya felt the sacrifice Vincent's legacy was demanding settle into her consciousness like a heavy diagnosis. She thought about her first day in nursing school, about the pride she'd felt when she passed her licensing exam, about the countless nights when her medical training had allowed her to recognize Diego's symptoms before they became emergencies. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at Cleveland General, "Maya, need to discuss your situation immediately. Corporate is asking questions about your recent absences." The message felt like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Maya realized she was about to lose not just her job but her profession, the identity she'd built through years of education, training and sacrifice that had begun long before Diego was born. "There's more," Dr. Vasquez said, her expression growing more serious. "Meridian's private investigators are already interviewing your former colleagues, questioning your financial situation, suggesting that Vincent's poker game was designed to compromise vulnerable healthcare workers." Maya watched Diego receive a breathing treatment that cost $15 to administer, the same treatment that had cost her $300 at Cleveland General just weeks ago. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was about to sacrifice her medical career to prove that accessible healthcare actually worked better than profitable healthcare. "Dr. Vasquez," Maya said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was contemplating, "if I don't testify, what happens to Vincent's work? Without your testimony, Congress won't have the legal foundation they need to investigate pharmaceutical pricing structures. The treatment centers we've planned, the expansion model we've designed, the 8,000 children who could benefit from this approach. None of it happens." Maya thought about Amanda Chen's text message, about Kevin's father working with legal teams, about dozens of parents who were counting on her courage to speak truths that pharmaceutical executives had spent billions to suppress. She thought about Vincent's handwritten note about helping other parents breathe freely, about the poker game that had been designed around her willingness to risk everything for Diego's health. Her laptop chimed with an email from the Congressional Hearing Committee, confirming her testimony schedule and attaching security protocols that made clear how seriously Washington was taking Meridian's anticipated response. "Maya," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, "Vincent knew this choice would be required. That's why he structured your inheritance to include financial security, regardless of what happens to your nursing career." Maya opened the financial folder again, seeing numbers that would allow her to support Diego without depending on her medical credentials. But the money felt like compensation for an amputation, necessary for survival but couldn't replace what was being removed. She watched Diego laugh with another child in Dr. Harper's facility, seeing him interact with peers who shared his condition but no longer shared his limitations. This was what Vincent had been building toward, and what Maya was being asked to sacrifice her professional identity to protect. "Dr. Vasquez," Maya said, feeling the decision crystallize with the same certainty that had driven her to Vincent's poker game. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. If I'm going to lose my nursing license, I want to explain exactly why it was worth it. Maya Rodriguez, RN, was about to cease existing, but Maya Rodriguez, advocate for dying children, was just beginning. The transformation was complete, and the cost was finally clear. The press conference podium stood in Vincent's main hall, positioned beneath the crystal chandelier that had witnessed so many clandestine medical consultations. Maya adjusted the microphone, looking out at a crowd that would have terrified her just months ago: investigative journalists, pharmaceutical industry representatives, parents clutching photos of their sick children, and congressional staffers documenting everything for the upcoming hearings. Dr. Vasquez had spent the morning helping Maya prepare remarks that would effectively end her nursing career while beginning something unprecedented. The folder containing her resignation letter from Cleveland General sat beside Vincent's financial evidence, two documents that together represented the complete demolition and reconstruction of her professional identity. "Good morning," Maya began, her voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who had already lost everything she'd once thought she needed. "6 months ago, I was a night shift nurse drowning in medical debt, watching my son Diego struggle to breathe, while I struggled to afford his medications. Today, I'm here to explain how a drug dealer's mansion became the blueprint for fixing American healthcare." She could see Jonathan Blackwood in the third row, his expression revealing professional frustration mixed with grudging respect for an opponent who had refused to disappear quietly. Beside him sat legal representatives from 3 pharmaceutical companies, their laptops open, documenting every word for the litigation strategies they were already preparing. "Yesterday, I submitted my resignation from Cleveland General Hospital," Maya continued, watching several journalists lean forward with sharp attention. "Not because I'm ashamed of my nursing career, but because I've discovered something more important than my individual professional survival: a healthcare model that works." Through the video connection to Dr. Harper's facility, Maya could see Diego working with a respiratory therapist, his breathing unrestricted, his laughter carrying none of the wheeze that had been the soundtrack of their previous life together. That sound, or rather the absence of struggle in that sound, had become her compass through every impossible decision of the past 6 months. "Vincent Castellano was a criminal who built something extraordinary," Maya said, gesturing toward the hidden passages that led to the underground medical facility. "This mansion contains treatment centers that have served 47 children in 6 months, providing medication and care that would have cost their families a combined total of $1.2 million. She opened Vincent's financial folder, reading numbers that represented not just mathematical proof, but family testimonies written in medical bills and insurance denials. The total operational cost for providing that same treatment was $87,000. The difference between $1.2 million and $87,000 isn't medical innovation, it's artificial scarcity designed to extract profit from desperation." Maya watched Amanda Chen in the audience, holding a photograph of her daughter receiving treatment that had saved their family from bankruptcy. Beside her sat Kevin's father, whose legal team had already begun documenting pharmaceutical pricing structures that would support congressional investigations. Dozens of parents who had discovered their children's mysterious benefactor through this press conference, finally understanding why their medication costs had suddenly become manageable. "Next week, I will testify before Congress about Meridian Health Solutions, pricing algorithms, about their strategy for maximizing profit from children's respiratory conditions, about their systematic creation of medical debt that destroys families." Maya's voice grew stronger as she spoke truths that pharmaceutical executives had spent fortunes to suppress. "I will present evidence proving that accessible healthcare is not only morally necessary but economically superior to profitable healthcare." Blackwood stood up abruptly, his movement creating a ripple of attention throughout the room. Maya watched him exit without speaking, recognizing the strategic retreat of someone who realized that intimidation had been replaced by something much more dangerous: documentation. "By testifying, I will lose my nursing license," Maya continued. feeling the weight of that sacrifice settle into acceptance rather than regret. I will be barred from working in medical facilities, challenged by some of the most powerful lobbying groups in America, and probably sued by corporations with unlimited legal resources. She paused, looking directly into the cameras that would broadcast her next words to families across the country who were facing the same impossible choices that had driven her to Vincent's poker game. But 47 children are breathing freely because Vincent Castellano proved that medical treatment doesn't have to bankrupt families. 8,000 more children could receive the same care if we have the courage to challenge artificial scarcity. Maya felt Diego's presence through the video connection, watching him play with other children whose families no longer had to choose between medication and survival. This was what Vincent had been building toward, not just individual treatment, but systematic proof that another approach was possible. "My name is Maya Rodriguez," she concluded, feeling the transformation that had begun with her last $20 finally reaching completion. "I was a nurse. Now I'm something more important. A mother who refused to let her child's future be determined by pharmaceutical profit margins." The applause lasted longer than Maya had expected, carrying the sound of recognition from other parents who understood exactly what that refusal had cost and why it had been worth everything. 3 weeks after the press conference, Maya stood in the arrivals terminal at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport, watching passengers emerge from the gate that would bring Diego home. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the strange sensation of waiting for her son without the familiar weight of financial panic that had defined their relationship for so long. The terminal felt different now, or perhaps she was seeing it through eyes that had been fundamentally altered by the past 6 months. The same fluorescent lighting that had once felt harsh during their desperate late-night emergency room visits now seemed merely functional. The overhead announcements about delayed flights reminded her of hospital intercoms, but without the spike of anxiety that medical environments had triggered when every minute of treatment translated to dollars they couldn't afford. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Chen. Congressional hearing went better than expected. Meridian's executives looked rattled. The message carried the weight of collective victory, but Maya found herself more focused on Diego's approaching footsteps than on the political implications of her testimony's aftermath. She spotted him before he saw her, taller somehow, moving with the easy confidence of a child who had spent 3 weeks breathing without restriction. Diego's laughter reached her first, the sound pure and unobstructed, carrying none of the careful modulation she'd learned to listen for during his worst episodes. When their eyes met across the crowded terminal, Maya felt 6 months of transformation crystallize into a single moment of recognition. "Mom!" Diego's voice carried across the space between them, and Maya realized she was crying before she understood why. He ran toward her with the unrestricted energy of a child whose lungs had finally learned to trust themselves. When Diego reached her, Maya lifted him in an embrace that felt like reclaiming something precious that had been temporarily borrowed. But as she held him, she noticed how he studied her face with new awareness, as if he too recognized that fundamental changes had occurred during their separation. "You look different," Diego said, his observation carrying the startling accuracy that children possess when they haven't yet learned to politely ignore obvious truths. "Stronger, maybe?" Maya laughed, tasting salt from tears she hadn't realized were still falling. "I feel different. Do you remember the night I went to play poker with our last $20? The question felt surreal to ask, but she needed him to understand the journey they had traveled together, even when separated by geography and circumstance. "You were scared," Diego said matter-of-factly, "but you did it anyway because my medicine cost too much." His matter-of-fact delivery carried wisdom that made Maya's chest tighten with recognition of how much he had understood, even when she'd tried to shield him from their desperation. "I was terrified," Maya admitted, taking his hand as they walked toward baggage claim. "I didn't know that being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what needs to be done, even when you're afraid." Diego squeezed her fingers, his grip carrying strength she didn't remember from 3 weeks ago. Dr. Harper said you testified in Congress. That's like being on TV, but more important. Maya smiled at his description, recognizing that her son had spent these weeks among adults who treated him as capable of understanding serious matters rather than protecting him from difficult truths. Dr. Harper was right. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting consequences that feel scary. Like losing your nursing job? Diego asked, his question revealing how much the adults at Dr. Harper's facility had trusted him with reality rather than comfortable fiction. Like losing my nursing job, Maya confirmed, but gaining something more important. She paused, looking down at her son, whose breathing remained steady and unrestricted despite their emotional conversation. 6 months ago, crying would have triggered his asthma. Today, he could experience strong emotions without medical consequences. As they waited for Diego's luggage, Maya received a call from Dr. Vasquez. Maya, the Senate subcommittee wants to schedule follow-up testimony. 3 pharmaceutical companies have agreed to meet with congressional mediators about pricing reforms. Maya listened to Dr. Vasquez's update while watching Diego interact with other travelers, his easy confidence revealing how much he had changed during their separation. When she ended the call, Diego was studying her with curious eyes. "Are you going back to being a nurse?" he asked. Maya considered the question, understanding that her answer would define not just her professional future, but the example she was setting for her son about adapting when circumstances demand fundamental change. "I'm going to be something new," she said, "something that didn't exist before we found Vincent's house." Diego nodded with the acceptance that children demonstrate when adults finally tell them the truth, instead of managing their perceptions. "Like how I'm still me, but I can breathe better now?" "Exactly like that," Maya said, feeling the weight of her transformation settle into gratitude rather than loss. She was returning to Cleveland, but as someone fundamentally different from the desperate woman who had gambled $20 on an impossible hope. Diego was coming home to a mother who had discovered that sometimes losing everything you thought you needed was the only way to find out who you actually were. They were both returning, but neither of them was the same. The new beginning. 6 months later, Maya stood in the renovated Victorian mansion that had once belonged to Vincent the Viper Castellano, watching Diego help Dr. Harper demonstrate new respiratory equipment to a congressional delegation. The morning sunlight streamed through windows that had been dark and shuttered when she'd first entered this house, transforming spaces that had once felt secretive into something open and hopeful. The underground medical facility had been expanded into a fully licensed treatment center, its hidden passages now brightly lit corridors connecting examination rooms, pharmacy stations, and family consultation spaces. What Vincent had built in shadows had become a model for congressional healthcare reform, proof that accessible treatment wasn't just morally necessary but economically sustainable. Mrs. Rodriguez, Senator Patricia Willingham, approached with the respectful tone that politicians reserved for witnesses whose testimony had fundamentally altered policy discussions. The pharmaceutical pricing reform bill passed committee yesterday. Meridian Health Solutions has agreed to reduce pediatric respiratory medication costs by 40% as part of the settlement agreement. Maya nodded, feeling satisfaction without surprise. The legal battles of the past 6 months had been brutal but predictable, each pharmaceutical company's aggressive response serving as additional evidence of the artificial scarcity they'd worked so hard to maintain. Her testimony had cost her nursing license, but it had also created legal precedent that made Vincent's model replicable across the country. 40% is significant, Maya replied, watching Diego explain oxygen concentrator settings to a congressman's aide with the easy confidence of someone who understood these machines intimately. But Dr. Vasquez's data shows we can provide the same medications for 70% less when we eliminate profit maximization. Through the mansion's main windows, Maya could see the construction crews working on the second building, a residential facility for families traveling long distances for treatment. Amanda Chen had donated the funding after her daughter's complete recovery, understanding that accessible healthcare required not just affordable medication, but comprehensive support for families navigating medical crises. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Kevin's father. Legal team confirmed. 8 more pharmaceutical companies agreed to congressional mediation. Your model is spreading faster than we anticipated. The message carried triumph, but Maya found herself more focused on the sound of children's laughter echoing through spaces that had once witnessed only clandestine medical consultations. Ms. Rodriguez. Dr. Harper joined their conversation, carrying a folder thick with documentation. The Cleveland Clinic wants to schedule a consultation about implementing our protocols in their pediatric respiratory department. They're specifically requesting your oversight of the transition. Maya accepted the folder, recognizing the irony that hospitals were now seeking guidance from someone they'd systematically excluded from traditional medical employment. Her new role, healthcare advocate and policy consultant, hadn't existed 6 months ago, but congressional testimony and documented results had created professional opportunities that transcended conventional medical credentials. Diego seems comfortable with the media attention, Senator Willingham observed, watching Maya's son field questions from journalists with thoughtful responses that revealed how much he'd learned about healthcare policy through personal experience. He understands that his story matters, Maya said, feeling pride mixed with protective concern. But he also knows this house belongs to more children than just him. The mansion now served 43 families regularly, with another 87 children receiving remote consultation and medication support. Each success story had become evidence in ongoing congressional hearings, proof that Vincent's criminal enterprise had accidentally discovered solutions that legitimate medical institutions had failed to implement. Maya walked through the main hall toward Vincent's former office, now converted into her consultation space where she met with parents navigating the same impossible choices that had driven her to that underground poker game. The crystal chandelier still hung overhead, but the room's purpose had been completely transformed, from a drug dealer's command center to a place where families learned they had options beyond bankruptcy and desperation. At her desk, Maya opened a letter from Cleveland General Hospital, an official apology for her employment termination, accompanied by an offer to create a new position, Director of Family Healthcare Advocacy. The salary was higher than she'd ever earned as a night shift nurse, and the role would involve consulting with other hospitals, implementing Vincent's model. But more than professional vindication, the offer represented recognition that her transformation had been necessary rather than merely costly. She had lost her identity as Maya Rodriguez, RN, but had become something more important. Maya Rodriguez, the woman who proved that mothers could change entire systems when their children's lives depended on it. Through her office window, Maya watched Diego race across the mansion's lawn with other children, their laughter carrying easily through air that no longer held the wheeze of restricted breathing. The sound reminded her of that rain-soaked November night when she'd gambled $20 on an impossible hope, never imagining that winning would require losing everything she'd thought she needed. Her laptop chimed with an email from Dr. Vasquez. Congressional Budget Committee approved funding for 12 additional treatment centers based on Vincent's model. Maya, we're going to save thousands of children. Maya closed her laptop and walked outside, feeling the late spring sunshine warm her face as she watched her son play with the easy confidence of someone who had learned to trust his own breathing. They had both returned to Cleveland, but neither was the same person who had left. Sometimes the most important transformations began with the courage to risk everything on hope.